Wednesday, top of the hour, and we are coming on the air with the next step of President Biden's midterm push by focusing on gas prices and releasing about a day's worth of oil from America's reserves. Who the president is pointing the finger out for those high costs as he swears that today's move has nothing to do with the upcoming election. Plus, more legal trouble for former President Trump, expected to answer questions under oath in a defamation lawsuit from a woman who accuses him of rape. He's denying everything, but that's not stopping a judge from getting things rolling. And we're getting new body camera video from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' so-called election police. Why some of the people arrested say they didn't know that they did anything wrong. Plus, the world's deadliest animal to humans. It's not a lion, it's not a bear, it's not even an inch long. It's the mosquito. And those pests really like how some of us smell. But a new study now reveals why, and it could save millions of lives. And in our backstory, we go behind the scenes of an exclusive interview with Pfizer's CEO as part of our new show, Talking with Business Leaders. That's later in the show with one of the best in the business. Good day, I'm Tom Costello in for Hallie. And one day after talking about abortion, President Biden is now turning to gas prices, releasing 15 million barrels of oil from the country's strategic petroleum reserves, part of an effort to lower the cost we all pay at the pump, something he says has nothing to do with the midterms.
Is it politically motivated, sir?
No, it's not.
3 weeks before the midterms.
Look, it makes sense. I've been doing this for how long now? It's not politically motivated at all. It's motivated to make sure that I continue to push on what I've been pushing on.
He has been releasing from the SBR since March. As we've been talking about, polls show inflation and the economy are way more important to voters than abortion rights right now. It's the last of a total of 180 million barrels that he's releasing, ahead of another potential spike in oil prices. Why? Because of this looming embargo by the EU on Russian oil in December, just as Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing countries are slashing production. All that could, of course, drive prices even higher. And then there's the context you know all too well. Gas right now at $3.85 a gallon. It's down a tick from last week, but up from a month ago, and of course, up from a year ago. The other thing about oil, we use a lot of it, as you know, nearly 20 million barrels a day. So today's release of 15 million barrels total doesn't even cover your typical Wednesday in America. And America's oil reserves are not unlimited. The SPR is now at its lowest level since Ghostbusters and The Karate Kid were in theaters back in June 1984 when Bert, our floor director, was a young whippersnapper. All right, the reserves, now a line being used by Republicans on the campaign trail about the reserves, as we saw in this exchange last night during the Florida Senate debate. Okay, NBC's Kelly O'Donnell is at the White House. Kelly, the president is blaming foreign countries and oil companies for high prices, but he's also walking a fine line here, right? Talking about America's record oil production while still calling for clean energy permit reform. Talk us through the political tightrope he's walking here, and he always gets an earful from the right saying that he's essentially curtailing domestic production.
It is a friction point that we have heard a number of times, and this White House and President Biden are acutely aware that gas prices matter to consumers, many of whom are voters, and voting is coming up with early voting underway in many places and just a couple of weeks until the midterm elections. But as the president points out, this is something he has been doing for a longer period of time, trying to respond to inflation and these different price pressures that have been brought about by world events. He is, of course, arguing for greener energy, more energy independent for the U.S., and at the same time is saying he wants energy companies from the fossil fuel sector, oil companies, to invest in the U.S. And so part of what he announced today was this buyback plan to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at a certain price point, and to do that at $70 a barrel. It is higher than that now, and so that will take some market forces to be in line with it, in part to try to get them to invest. The White House says frequently that there are leases available for investment that energy companies are not using. The Republicans often criticize the president for saying that he is trying to put an end to the oil industry by being in favor of things like electric vehicles and a reduced fossil fuel output from the United States. So this is complicated. There's an urgent matter where people have bills to pay and a gas tank to fill, and so he's trying to do something that gets at this in the short term.
You know, I checked the price of oil.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kelly. I checked
right
the price of oil this afternoon, $85 a barrel. He says that they would refill the SPR at 70. I mean, that's a long way away, right? Potentially, especially with the war in Ukraine raging and the possibility it's going to go higher again.
Could go higher, and part of what he tried to argue today is that that would be a price that the U.S. government would spend the money to refill that, replenish that supply at a profit for the American taxpayer. So setting that into the marketplace. So we'll see where it goes. He's also complaining that a number of oil companies are using the profits that they're getting right now to buy back stock and things like that. And so he's saying they're not putting some of the savings that they have and some of the profits they have back into ways that could ease the burden on consumers. So the president is pointing at a lot of different factors and at the same time has limited control over what he can do. Using this tool is one of them. It's meant for emergencies. He considers this an emergency where he can exercise this authority right now. Tom?
Thank you, Kelly. Kelly O'Donnell at the White House. All right, let's get out on the campaign trail right now, where Arizona's Republican governor candidate, Kari Lake, is dotting the state, holding a rally in Scottsdale tonight, just hours after she held one in Tucson. And she's bringing in the big guns. You see her right there, standing next to Virginia's governor, Glenn Youngkin, who's just coming off an event with Oregon's Republican candidate for governor. Today, Youngkin is warning that elections have consequences.
Spirit of Virginia is alive and well, and let me tell you, Arizona, you're going to have to fight to preserve the spirit of Arizona by electing Kari Lake. That's what you got to do.
As a reminder, Lake is a well-known election denier who just this week is saying that she will only accept November's results if she wins. Sounds familiar? That's alarming, as we are seeing polls like this one showing from the AP that just 9% of Americans say democracy is working well right now, just 9%. Vaughn Hilliard is back in his home state, Casa Grande, Arizona. All right, Vaughn, talk to us about Lake's message on the trail. We know that she's spreading lies about vaccines and kids and claiming Dr. Martin Luther King would be an America First Republican.
Right, this is part of an effort to reach a broader swath of the Arizona electorate. You saw in 2018 and 2020, Democrats here win the 2 U.S. Senate seats. You saw Joe Biden narrowly win Arizona in 2020. And that is where you see her not only campaigning alongside Tulsi Gabbard, the former Democratic Congresswoman, last night, essentially using both her and Gabbard's stories about one time being Democrats and now being Republicans, you know, in her words, America First Republicans, but also then campaigning with Glenn Youngkin, who you recall just 1 year ago when he pulled off that upset win in blue state Virginia. He never campaigned with Donald Trump on the road, but he was calling it a big tent Republican Party, in his words, that would include forever Trumpers and never Trumpers, again, his words. But that is where it was telling to watch her on the campaign trail here today with him as she tries to bring over not only independents, but some of those conservatives in the state of Arizona who have shown a willingness to vote blue in these past years.
Yeah, you just mentioned Youngkin in Virginia, and you're right. I mean, right across the river here, he campaigned as a MAGA Republican until he won the primary. Then he kind of shifted to the middle. So do they think that that same approach is going to work in Arizona?
That's what the hope of the Lake campaign is, because I don't think there is any candidate who is more favored in Donald Trump's eyes than Kari Lake. She's the Arizona gubernatorial candidate, but she has shot up into the scene. She has campaigned around the country, even with him, and there's been talk of her being a potential 2024 pick for vice president if Trump were to run again. And frankly, Glenn Youngkin even suggested, when somebody in the crowd suggested that she should be his VP candidate if he were to run for president, he turned and looked at her and said, that's her choice. This is a situation in which the polls still are close between Kari Lake and her Democratic opponent, Katie Hobbs. At the same time, this race has risen in prominence at the same time that a U.S. Senate candidate, that's where we're standing here right now, where Democrat Mark Kelly is trying to hold on to his U.S. Senate seat against Republican Blake Masters, Tom.
Well, there's a reason Youngkin is on the campaign trail, of course. And you mentioned the fact that you're right there with Senator Mark Kelly. Unlike the governor's race, which has kind of swung back and forth in Arizona, Kelly is mostly out in front right now, right?
Right. The polls have consistently shown him ahead here, and we're in Casa Grande, Arizona. He's on a swing in which he's making stops here around the state of Arizona. Polls have shown him ahead here, and he's actually campaigning today with Montana Senator John Tester here, and this is a part of a broader appeal to not only reach the Maricopa County area, but the more far out-reaching areas beyond those city limits here. Tom?
ASU's favorite son, Von Hilliard, back in his home state of Arizona. Thank you, Von. All right, some late-breaking news this afternoon. A Wisconsin-based group is asking the Supreme Court to block the president's student debt relief plan just days before the program is set to kick in. The group asking the court to suspend any relief while its lawsuit is going forward. The White House says more than 8 million people so far have signed up for the debt cancellation program since the Department of Education's application portal launched on Monday. NBC's Ken Delanian joins me now. Ken, as I understand the situation here, this particular challenge has already been thrown out, right, by multiple courts. So why now appeal to the Supreme Court?
It seems like they're rolling the dice, Tom. The lower courts have ruled that they don't have standing to sue because you can't just, as a normal taxpayer, challenge the way the government spends money. You have to have more than that. And you have to show, in this case, that you were irreparably harmed by this policy. Now, they're making some interesting legal arguments. They're saying that Biden exceeded his authority here because he didn't have permission from Congress to do this. It's an argument that could be receptive to the Supreme Court, but they have to get clear of that standing hurdle.
Well, okay, to that point, finding somebody who does have standing, a plaintiff. So let's go a little bit deeper on that part of it.
So I've been checking around on this. There are some legal experts who believe that no one could have standing on this because there's a very specific law that was passed during the pandemic that appears to give the president the power to do this regarding loans, and nobody can imagine who it could be that could show they've been irreparably harmed and could have the kind of standing that could overcome this stuff.
I mean, in theory, couldn't you argue that any taxpayer who didn't go to college and now has to pick up the cost, in theory, for this debt relief program could be harmed?
You and I would think so, but the Supreme Court has ruled that it's not enough just to be a taxpayer, because then they would become the complaints bureau for every taxpayer that doesn't like the way the government is spending his or her money.
I like that idea, the complaints bureau. We need one of those. All right, Ken, thank you. Ken Delanian on the job for us.
You bet.
Former President Trump was expected to answer questions today under oath in a 2019 defamation lawsuit brought by E. Jean Carroll. She's a writer who says her reputation was damaged after Mr. Trump denied her allegations that he raped her in a Manhattan department store dressing room back in the 1990s. The judge in the case has previously rejected requests by Mr. Trump's legal team to delay the testimony, and they have tried to argue that he was acting in his capacity as president when he denied the allegations. Mr. Trump also denies ever meeting Carroll and said he was, quote, she was totally lying. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is tracking this story. Gabe, a lot of moving pieces here. The judge in this case has, I guess, taken a hard line against the Trump legal team's attempts to delay the testimony. He's also cited, though, that both Trump and Carroll's age is a factor and a reason why they need to get things moving.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. The judge last week said that this deposition needed to move forward because Trump's legal team was essentially running out the clock, and he cited the, quote, advanced age of both of the parties in this lawsuit. E. Jean Carroll is 77 years old. Mr. Trump is 76 years old, Tom.
Interesting. Okay. And the next steps here, there's a trial scheduled for this suit next February. So what can we expect from that? Do we know yet?
Well, as you said, there's a lot of moving pieces here. First, I should point out that earlier today, E. Jean Carroll actually tweeted out that this deposition today was underway. She subsequently deleted those tweets. It's unclear why. Perhaps, you know, it's possible that her legal team did not want her tweeting about it. We just don't know at this point. The New York Times had reported that this deposition was supposed to take place at Mar-a-Lago today, but we're still waiting about any confirmation on that. With regards to what's next, you mentioned the trial in February. There's also something pending before that. Right now, this is before an appeals court. As you said in the introduction, president's legal team, former president's legal team, had been arguing that it was in his official capacity that he made these statements denying the allegations. Of course, then the former president may have undercut that by, last week after the judge made his ruling, he repeated those same denials of this and essentially called this entire suit a con job. But depending on what happens with that appeal, basically if Mr. Trump is ruled to have made these denials while he was acting in his official capacity as a government employee, the federal government could potentially then be added to this lawsuit, and it could get thrown out because federal employees do have more protections when they're being asked, if someone is acting as a federal employee, they have more protections. So in theory, this could be thrown out entirely, Tom.
Okay, I'm not a lawyer. I wonder whether you have protection to lie. But anyway, Carol's lawyers also say that she's planning to file a separate case against Mr. Trump next month, right? So what do we know about that suit?
Right. So, Tom, earlier this year, New York State enacted a law that allowed adult survivors of sexual misconduct to sue no matter the statute of limitations. Now, the one-year window for that is set to begin on November 24th. And E. Jean Carroll has indicated that she does plan to file a separate lawsuit of battery and emotional distress against the former president next month. So it's possible that this deposition that is supposedly happening today could be used against him in that case, Tom.
Boy, yeah, you said it. A lot of moving pieces here, hard to track. Gabe, thank you for staying on top of it. Gabe Gutierrez. It's fall, but it feels like winter for a lot of Americans out there. Nearly 45 million people under freeze and frost alerts tonight. Jacksonville and Atlanta. Yeah, you heard right. They're expected to wake up to record lows tomorrow morning. It's parts of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Kentucky all get their first snow of the season just over the last 2 days. Look at that. One county in Michigan actually got more than 18 inches of snow when they usually just get about 5 inches in all of October. Some southern cities even woke up to colder than expected temps in the north today. Dallas was colder than Boston. Atlanta, colder than Cleveland. Earlier today, a major escalation also from President Putin when he declared 4 annexed regions in Ukraine will now be run under martial law. He made that announcement on Russian TV. It basically means the military can take over from civilian government, giving those in charge a range of abilities to impose curfews, seize property, even possibly detain people in these places. NBC's Keir Simmons joins me now. He's in Moscow. Keir, Russia's military was already controlling parts of these annexed regions. So what's the potential impact of this martial law declaration?
Well, to put it simply, Tom, the military now has the capacity to act with impunity, to act as it chooses. And this martial law in those annexed areas of Ukraine, actually a little noticed aspect of President Putin's declaration was that it extends right across the country. So, for example, the martial law doesn't, but, for example, they are now able to search cars here in Moscow. So I think overall, aside from the detail there, the political picture is this. We've talked about, would President Putin be prepared to compromise? This is yet another sign that that is not the direction he's going in, that in fact what he is doing is doubling down, taking a firmer grip on the country and on these areas. And there's a message there.
Yeah, we're seeing also Russia tell people in Kherson to evacuate, warning of a possible imminent battle. So how might we see that situation there in Ukraine evolve in Kherson in the coming days as people start fleeing?
Well, one of the military commander that President Putin recently appointed, Tom, was very open. Frankly, it would have been stunning to many Russians who would not have seen such openness from their military in an interview overnight, talking about a difficult situation, a tense situation. That city of Kherson is critically important, but in very simple terms, it sits on the wrong side of the Dnipro River, if you like. And you can imagine, the river is just a natural barrier in military terms. The Russians are crossing that city. So are they trying to pull back to use the river as a better defense? Or are they preparing to fight for that city because the Ukrainian military has been bearing down on it? We don't know. At this stage, though, we do know, as you mentioned, that civilians are being told to leave by the Russians.
Yeah, it certainly seems things are building there. Listen, I was struck by your reporting out of Moscow, out of Kazakhstan the last few days, and then a phenomenal New York Times piece today showing Moscow essentially abandoned or of large numbers of men. It's like the streets are all women. Really a stark series of pictures in the New York Times. What have you seen there?
Yeah, but listen, there are still many men here in Moscow, but we have noticed fewer. I mean, there will be some who have, frankly, left because they're worried about the partial draft. There will be some who are keeping a low profile because they're worried about the potential draft. And then there will be those, of course, who have gone to fight or who are on their way to the front lines there in Ukraine. So it is having a real impact. And the important point here again is, and you know that phrase that folks use there, all politics is local. Well, it's true in Russia too. Effectively, one of the big challenges of President Putin is the impact of all of this domestically. Not that this is simply a conflict in a somewhat faraway place, but that it is affecting families here in Russia. That's the issue, because the only independent pollster, Tom, here in Russia says that Russians are anxious. The thing that they are the most anxious about, many of them still support President Putin, but the thing they are most anxious about is that partial draft. President Putin will know that, and that is again why it's clear that he is determined not to give up in Ukraine, and that he clearly still wants to be able to move somewhat quickly. But I think the fundamental principle is this: he cannot see any way in which anything other than a victory works for him politically. Underscore the last sentence you just said there. He cannot see anything short of a victory that would work politically. NBC's Keir Simmons, who spent a lot of time in Moscow and has interviewed Putin several times. Keir, thank you very much. Stay safe while you're there. Coming up, tax brackets are changing because of inflation. How that might affect you and your paychecks. Plus, an FDA panel votes on a controversial drug for preterm births. Will it stay on the market? We're going to get you over to the 5 things you need to know about when we come back. We're back, and New York City has opened a huge tent facility to temporarily house migrants being sent there from southern states. What it looks like coming up later in the local. But first from us, there's a cost of living crisis in the United Kingdom, with inflation also at a 40-year high. The consumer price index there rose a staggering 10.1% in September, even more than the U.S., driven, of course, by higher food, transportation, and energy costs. Food in the UK up 14.6% on the year, the largest spike in 4 decades. Transportation up almost 11%. Household goods also up almost 11%. And just like here in the U.S., the UK's central bank is expected to continue hiking interest rates to try to get this under control. And our high inflation will likely lead to lower income tax rates in 2023. Tax rates are always adjusted for inflation, which typically means incremental adjustments. But with inflation at its highest in decades, the IRS adjustment is likely to push many Americans into a lower tax bracket for 2023. So you may get some relief when you turn in your taxes in 2024. Here's NBC's Brian Chung to break it all down. All right, Brian, with prices rising at the fastest pace in decades, the IRS adjustment rating here is automated, and yet is it going to keep pace with inflation? It seems like it may come a little short.
It does come a little bit short. Let me walk you through the numbers, since I am the data reporter after all. We're talking about the 2023 tax changes, and we saw a big adjustment as announced yesterday for the 2023 standard tax deduction, $13,850 for singles, $27,700 for married couples filing jointly. This, by the way, is a 7% increase from what we had seen for the 2022 filing season. But again, you'll recall that inflation for this year, as of the last reading, was about 8.1%. 10%. So still net inflation still taking a bigger bite out. But one important thing to note here, Tom, again, we're talking about 2023, meaning you won't file these until the spring of 2024. So not necessarily something that Americans need to think as they get their tax filing documents ready next spring.
Absolutely. We're not talking about this tax year. It's next tax year. Now, break down for us the tax brackets that are going to be modified. I was looking at this earlier today, and virtually every tax bracket changes.
That's exactly right, Tom. So let's take a look at exactly what those tax brackets are. Again, these are the changes as announced yesterday for the 2023 filing year. The lowest rate of 10% below those under $11,000 in annual income. This changed. We also saw across the board everything. All of these numbers, which I'm not going to go through, even for the higher tax brackets, all changing because of inflation. Across the board, these were bumped up by about 7%. But again, that 7% is lower than the 8.1% inflation that we're experiencing. So you could make the argument that this is perhaps eroding where those lines are. Although, of course, again, 2023, the income that we'll ultimately get when it comes to those filings yet to be determined because we're not done with the calendar year yet. But still, worth noting that the IRS at least trying to give a little bit of comfort with that automatic adjustment as we heard yesterday.
Yeah, I do think it's worth pointing out, though, this was not a decision made by the Biden administration. This is an automated calculus that is codified by Congress. All right, now you've got one more interesting point here where we're going to see an adjustment because of inflation.
Yes. Again, it's not just in the tax brackets and then in the standard deduction that we're seeing adjustments. We also saw some changes in what you can deduct in terms of the maximum for your estate if it's turned over because of the event of death, but also in the case of gifting. So you can see right here, 12.9 million. It used to be about 12 million and change as of the 2020 filing season. And also the annual amount of gifts that you could deduct up to a maximum used to be about 16K. They raised that to about 17K as of the 2023 year as well. Again, this is also per person, so you wouldn't have to pay taxes if you paid below that amount per, let's say, for example, child. Again, that number going up to $17,000 in the 2023 year.
Excuse me, yep, and also the flex spending numbers are going up. All right, Brian, thank you. Great reporting. Really appreciate breaking it down for us. I'm going to go in depth on this tonight on NBC Nightly News, the tax income changes and how it will affect you. Inflation has holiday travelers also adjusting their getaway plans. Thanksgiving and Christmas could be among the most expensive on record in terms of airfares. If you haven't booked yet, you should.
Generally speaking, last-minute fares go in one direction, and it is always up.
The soaring costs, a combination of inflation, jet fuel prices, and the ongoing staffing shortages, all hitting at the same time that demand is booming. This past Sunday, the TSA screened nearly 2.5 million passengers, the highest daily figure since February 2020. And while planes are getting fuller, the airlines are struggling to keep up, with about 15% fewer flights taking off than compared to pre-pandemic.
All right, travel experts say this is the season to consider international travel, especially if you're talking about the holidays, because round-trip fares to places like Athens, Lisbon, and Dublin, they're actually cheaper than a round-trip ticket from New York City to the Midwest during the holidays. Now to the 5 things that our team thinks you need to know about tonight. Number 1, the Iranian climber Ilnaz Rakabi. She returned home to cheers in Iran this morning from a competition in South Korea. Some activists and rights groups have been concerned for her safety after that video of her competing without her country's mandatory headscarf went viral. In an interview with State TV, Rakabi said she did not intentionally compete without a hijab. The circumstances in which that interview was conducted are unclear. Number 2, the country's largest source of JFK assassination records is suing President Biden and the National Archives. Why? The Mary Farrell Foundation wants archives to release all remaining documents related to the murder of President Kennedy nearly 60 years ago. Last year, the president postponed the release of the last batch of docs until December of this year, but the foundation says that delay was illegal. The JFK Records Act required all documents to be made public by 2017, but that has been delayed several times already. Number 3, actress Anna Mae Wong will be the first Asian American to appear on U.S. currency. Wong is known as Hollywood's first Asian American movie star, mostly back during the silent film era. She also fought for more representation for Asian Americans in films. She died back in 1961. Number 4, Spirit Airlines shareholders have approved a plan to sell the carrier to JetBlue Airways. Together, that would create the country's 5th largest airline. JetBlue's $3.8 billion offer to buy Spirit disrupts an earlier offer by Frontier. Now, federal regulators must decide if this would violate antitrust rules. And number 5, an FDA advisory panel is recommending that they revoke the approval for the drug Beckenna. It's intended to prevent preterm births. Now, the panel says the drug has not shown to be effective and exposes women to serious risk. The company behind it says it's an essential tool for preventing preterm births. The panel's vote does not mean the drug is removed from the market, yet the FDA will make a decision on that in the coming months. Have you ever gone for a hike and come back with what seems like 100 mosquito bites? Well, the friend you were with has none. Turns out new research actually shows some people are mosquito magnets because of how they smell. A team at Rockefeller University in New York found people who have high levels of certain acids on their skin are 100 times more likely to attract female mosquitoes from a particular species. The same species, by the way, responsible for spreading diseases like dengue and yellow fever and Zika. And these are just some of the deadliest diseases in the world. And believe it or not, mosquitoes actually kill more humans than any other animal. So this new study could be monumental, possibly leading to the development of new products to mask or alter human scent and lower the frequency of these mosquito-borne diseases. NBC News medical correspondent Dr. John Torres is with me now. All right, John, so what is carboxylic acid? How does our body produce it, and why do mosquitoes love it?
And Tom, carboxylic acid is very common. We have it in everyday life. It's even in a lot of the citrus fruits we eat. You can't avoid it anywhere. But in this particular case, what happens is carboxylic acid is resulting because of this waxy compound we have that covers our skin. That makes our skin waterproof and protects the skin. When that interacts with the bacteria on our skin, the bacteria produces this carboxylic acid. And like you mentioned, in this study, what they found is the people that produced this carboxylic acid most were also the ones that were most attracted to and most likely more likely to get bit by these mosquitoes, which, as you mentioned, it can be a huge problem, especially worldwide, because of all the diseases the mosquitoes carry.
You know, it's astonishing. My wife and I go for a walk. She gets eaten alive. I get maybe 1 or 2 bites. It's really weird how it varies from people to people, right? And mosquito-borne diseases impact about 700 million people a year. I understand that's going to increase because of climate change and global temperatures that are on the increase, right? So is this study significant, and what can people do to reduce their bite risk?
And Tom, I think this study is very significant, and mainly because of what you're talking about, that we know these mosquito-borne illnesses are out there, like you mentioned, malaria, Zika, dengue fever, West Nile virus, the list goes on, and we know they're going to increase as the world starts warming up because we're going to have more mosquitoes in places. But like you mentioned, you know, some people get bit, others don't get bit as often, and we don't really know why that's happening. And this is one piece of the puzzle, but it's just one piece. We also know that mosquitoes are attracted by carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide that we breathe out. We know they're attracted by certain colors. In particular, the colors they're attracted to are orange, red, black, and cyan. So it's one of those things that we're learning more and more about the mosquitoes. We're learning more and more about what attracts them, and we've learned over the last decade, which means we can start targeting these things. Because as of right now, we have mosquito repellent. We have wearing clothing, you know, long sleeves, long pants, not going out in the early morning or late evening, you know, dusk and dawn, because that's when mosquitoes are there. Clearing out water sources, those types of things, and using the insect repellents to try and help there. But if we can get these, especially in those developing countries, where we can get an understanding of why they're biting and target those areas and target those reasons for biting, then we can hopefully cut down on mosquito bites, cut down on these diseases, even more important, Tom.
I think every couple in America has had this conversation. Why do you get bit and I don't? John, thank you. Dr. John Torres for us. When we come back, a record number of black women are running for national office this year. We're looking at some of those races and how they could make history. Coming up next. We're back, and a record number of black women are running for national office in next month's midterms. Take a look at the numbers right now. There are 63 black women running for Democratic and Republican nominations this year for governor, Senate, and the House, with some trying to be the first black woman to take the seat they're running for. Take Congresswoman Val Demings in Florida. If elected, she would be the third black woman to be elected to the U.S. Senate and the first from Florida. In Iowa and Georgia, Deidre DeGear and Stacey Abrams are vying to be the first black female governors in U.S. history. Joining me now is Yamiche Alcindor. All right, Yamiche, black women today make up only a small percentage of the number of elected officials, right? Talk to us about why, we have a black female vice president right now for the first time in history, 28 black female congresswomen, but no senators or governors. So talk us through the significance right now of the number of black candidates we have.
Well, these black candidates are really running in record numbers. These black women, they're calling it a movement. Whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they're feeling this sort of momentum to really go into politics and ask to be represented in our government. Now, they do face these twin challenges of race and gender really working against them in some ways. They face misogyny with voters and much-needed campaign donors who they need to give them money to really run these expensive campaigns, doubting them and saying, can you really win? The other thing is that someone like Kamala Harris, who's vice president now, she faced people asking whether or not she was eligible as a U.S. citizen. Even though she was born in California, you had people saying birtherism 2.0, maybe she's not an American. So those are just some of the unique challenges that black women face. But they're doing it. They're really trying, even though the political odds for a lot of these cases and a lot of these races are tough.
It's been kind of a common theme for people of color, right? Asking if they're really Americans. You sat down with, I understand, several women running for office this year. You mentioned the uphill battles that many of them face. What did they tell you about their struggles? And do they feel the pressure to try to break through?
Well, all of these black women candidates told me that diversity is key in our government. It's key when you look at elected officials. I talked to Val Demings, who's running, as you pointed out, for Senate in Florida. I talked to her and asked specifically, what's the significance of no black woman currently serving in the U.S. Senate? Take a listen to what she told me.
It should reflect the diversity of America. When we think about the talent, the skills, the strength of black women, we bring not only diversity in terms of her ethnic background, but we bring a diversity of perspectives and experiences.
So there you really have it, her taking and saying, we bring a lot to the table as black women. I also talked to a Republican, Tamika Hamilton. She's running for Congress in Sacramento, California. She talked to me about what she would tell other black women if they were thinking about getting into politics. Take a listen to that.
What's your message to black women who may be watching this saying, I'm inspired, but I'm also nervous?
Keep going. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. Don't let your fears try to tell you you can't do it. Don't stop.
And there you have it. She's saying, don't stop. I should also tell you that she got a little emotional. She started crying when I talked to her about her ancestors because she was raised by her grandmother and she was thinking about all the black women and black people who came before her who allowed her to be able to have the space to run for office. So it's incredible to talk to these women, and we'll see how they do and come the midterm elections.
Are we all better for having more voices at the table? It seems to me, regardless, all races, gender, everything. We're better off as a country.
Certainly, when you think about what the government was supposed to do, which is really reflect the will of the people, having every single person and every single part of our society reflected is critical there.
Yamiche, thank you. You always do great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
All right. Also, we have that House Republicans could have their most diverse conference ever after the midterms, as party leaders say women and minority candidates will help them flip the House in November. But even if they do, the 3 top leadership posts are guaranteed to be filled by white men. The GOP has nominated 74 minority candidates and women this election cycle, that according to the National Republican Campaign Committee. That includes 33 Hispanic and 28 black candidates. Coming up, confusion and anger. That's what's on newly released body cam videos of people being arrested for voting. What this means ahead of the midterms after the break. We're back. NBC covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you couldn't possibly stay on top of all of them, our bureau teams have broken it all down for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions. It's a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, New York City has opened its first tent shelters today for asylum seekers being bused there from southern states. They have beds for about 500 single men, as well as laundry facilities, a dining hall, phones. The goal is to have people stay at the facility for a few days while they try to figure out the next step, but there will be no limit for how long they can actually stay there. From our Midwest Bureau, students at a Missouri elementary school where that radioactive waste was found will switch to virtual learning. They'll be sent to other schools after Thanksgiving. As the school board works to ensure the hazardous material gets cleaned up. Nuclear weapons were made in that area back during World War II. From our Southeast Bureau, the causeway connecting Sanibel Island to Florida's mainland reopened today. 3 weeks ago, it was washed out by Hurricane Ian. It was supposed to be reopened at the end of the month, but Florida DOT crews worked around the clock to get temporary repairs done. We are getting a new video today of body camera footage showing police officers in Tampa unexpectedly showing up to arrest people on allegations that they illegally voted back in the 2020 elections. In these new videos obtained from the Tampa Police Department through a public records request, you see convicted felons getting arrested for voting. But it doesn't seem that any of them understood why they were getting arrested or why they were allowed to vote in the first place. Ramona Oliver, for instance, was getting ready to go to work that morning when police showed up. Watch what happened.
If you can put your hands behind your back, please. Oh, my God. Do not move.
Ultimately, ma'am, you have a warrant? Okay. The warrant. Hold on, listen. I know you caught off guard. I understand. Right? So you have a warrant. It's for voter fraud. Okay.
She is just one of 20 people who were arrested. At least 13 of them were black, that according to the Tampa Bay Times. Now, these arrests were the first public demonstration of a controversial new office created by Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida to look into what his office calls voting irregularities. NBC's Kerry Sanders joins me now. Kerry, this is just a handful of videos, the first of a handful of videos of people who thought that they were eligible to vote, right? They did their time. They thought they were eligible. What more do we know about these arrests?
Well, Tom, they were not only led to believe that they could vote, and the one that we just saw, and we'll hear a little bit more of Ramona Oliver, she actually thought that she was able to vote because when she was leaving prison, yes, she's a convicted criminal. She was served 19 years for second-degree murder. In Florida, when you are released from prison, you get your civil rights back where you can actually participate in elections. That was an amendment in the state of Florida so that voters agreed, yes, there are two exclusions. One is murder and the other is for a sex offense. But it's confusing. And Ramona Oliver and others kind of demonstrate that in the video with the police because she explains that she was under the impression, not only because of her own knowledge, but because state officials were telling her that she could indeed register to vote and vote. This is what she had to say again on that body camera video.
What led you to believe that you were eligible to register to vote? Did they tell you that, or is that?
Yes.
So this was just like a random person. Like, did you verify that? Like, as far as
like the person at the bus stop.
The Department of Corrections told me I could.
Department of Corrections told you could. After you voted, did you ever receive anything that said you couldn't vote? Said you weren't eligible?
No.
And so here we have her understanding from the Department of Corrections in the state of Florida that she can vote. She fills out the paperwork, sends it in. The supervisor of elections in Hillsborough County in this case, as well as the Department of State that handles the elections in the state, all say everything looks good. She gets a voter registration card in the mail and she votes. It's only then, after this new division created by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis begins looking into who voted, that they discover that there are these people who should be excluded. But their question is, if everybody's telling me I can vote, then how can you say I've committed a crime? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, and listen, murder is murder. There's no doubt about it. But if you did your time to society and then they lead you to believe you can vote, I'm not sure what else she could have been expected to do. Where does this go from here?
It'll probably go into court, and that's where it's headed, but it's going to be going there after the midterms. Some of the first trials are scheduled for December, and so it doesn't look like they'll be certainly not voting during the midterms. But one of the lawyers asked me today, we'll see if this even goes forward after the midterms, because maybe this was all a publicity stunt. That's one person's point of view here. Tom?
Carrie Sanders is having a birthday today. So, Carrie, happy birthday. Have a piece of cake for us and enjoy your day. Thanks, buddy. All right.
Much appreciated.
Still to come, we're getting the backstory from Andrew Ross Sorkin on his sit-down interview with the head of Pfizer. That's next. We have an update now on a story we brought you earlier. We are hearing now that former President Trump was, in fact, posed today. According to an attorney for writer E. Jean Carroll, who is suing him for defamation, when asked how long the deposition took, Carroll's attorney said it has been deemed confidential. Time now to get to the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together in our business and how it fits into our bigger picture. Tonight, we're taking a look at a new limited series that debuts right here on News Now. CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin sitting down with Pfizer's CEO Albert Bourla. As the FDA and the CDC today approved Novavax's COVID boosters ahead of an expected wave of cases coming this winter. Bourla, who's contracted COVID twice, by the way, says a wave of cases in Europe could mean trouble here in the United States.
If we won't pick up between now and the next 5 weeks in vaccinations rates in the U.S. So that people will be immune, I think will be a tough window.
It doesn't just stop with COVID. Bourla told Andrew that the mRNA technology in these vaccines could help with other diseases in the future as well, including cancer.
We'll see multiple other vaccines with this technology that will get better results than the current vaccinations.
My friend Andrew Ross Sorkin joins us now to talk about the interview and the start of his new series, Special Edition with Andrew Ross Sorkin on News Now. Andrew, you've spoken to a lot of big names in the business world over the years. Talk about how you work these relationships with these heads of these major companies to get them really giving you a wide-ranging and a full interview.
Thanks, Tom. And it's so great to be launching this evening and to see you, my friend, talk to you about it this way. You know, what we're trying to do here is bring you the most consequential people of this moment, whether they be in business, frankly, politics, culture. And over the series, we're going to be bringing you these longer form interviews, half-hour conversations that oftentimes you don't get that air, that breath that we get to do during the day. So this is an opportunity to really go deep with some of these folks. And in this instance, the first one we launched with is Albert Bourla, clearly in the middle of the hot seat. I mean, we're all trying to figure out what the future of COVID is like, but also, importantly, he is in the news himself and has created a controversy because he got COVID twice, literally within about 6 weeks of each other, just this past August, and now 6 weeks later. That unto itself has raised all sorts of questions about mandates again and the effectiveness of the vaccine and transmission and all of those questions which have ultimately, in some ways, prevented a lot of people or made a lot of people skeptical about taking the vaccine in the first place. So we got into all of that, not just the issues of the vaccine itself, but issues of free speech and the like and social media. And that's what we're trying to do with these conversations, to get a little bit deeper.
You know, you wear a lot of hats. Anchor on Squawk Box, New York Times. You are a first-rate interviewer. You've won an Emmy for an interview you did with the founder of WeWork. And now you've got this new special series. What is your ultimate goal here? And do you have a secret when you interview people? You know, interviewers all have a certain style to evoke responses. What's your secret? What's your style?
I don't know if I have a secret. I think the goal is always to let the viewer actually see the answer. It's actually one of the great things about TV. You know, in print, sometimes you have to actually get somebody to either say something or not say something. On TV, you actually get to see the answer. And my hope is that you get to go deep and you actually get real answers. And even if you may not get the answer that you like, you see the answer in a way that you may not otherwise be able to see or appreciate in other ways. So that's always the idea. I like, if I can, to try to get the guest who you're speaking to, the interviewee, to feel comfortable, to feel like they can be open, and actually that they even in certain cases want to be challenged. And I've argued with a lot of guests over the years that actually when you're challenged, it actually helps, doesn't hurt your credibility, especially when you're candid about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Listen, we're going to be watching. Congratulations on the new series. And you can see the first episode of Special Edition with Andrew Ross Sorkin tonight, 10:30 Eastern, right here on NBC News Now. It'll also be available, by the way, on demand, on Peacock, YouTube, NBCnews.com, you name it. All right, that's a wrap for this hour. We're going to have more for you tomorrow, same time, same place. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.